land?
Yes, American poem, like Edgar Allan Poe and Shakespeare.
May favorite. May part lang po sa lipunan. Ideas.
Yes, I have known Edgar Allan Poe. He he made the poem entitled Annabelle.
Hi there, we meet again. This time we're going to talk about American literature, specifically poetry, famous quotes, and their notable works. So, are you ready for this trip? Let's go!
American poetry, literatures of the world. But first, let's talk about the history of American poetry. American poetry, the poetry of the United States, arose first as efforts by colonists to add their voices to English poetry in the 17th century, well before the constitutional unification of the 13 colonies. Although before this unification, a strong oral tradition often likened to poetry existed among Native American societies. Unsurprisingly, most of the early colonist work relied on contemporary British models of poetic form, diction, and theme. However, in the 19th century, a distinctive American idiom began to emerge. By the later part of that century, when Walt Whitman was winning an enthusiastic audience abroad, poets from the United States had begun to take their place at the forefront of the English language avant-garde. On the whole, the development of poetry in the American colonists mirrors the development of the colonists themselves. The early poetry is dominated by the need to preserve the integrity of the Puritan ideals that created the settlement in the first place. As the colonists grew in confidence, the poetry they wrote increasingly reflected their drive towards independence. This shift in subject matter was not reflected in the mode of writing, which tended to be conservative, to say the least. This can be seen as a product of the physical remove at which American poets operated from the center of English language poetic developments in London. Ralph Waldo Emerson. Date of birth, May 25, 1803. Date of death, April 27, 1882. Emerson was an American essayist, lecturer, philosopher, and poet, the pioneer of American poetry who led the transcendentalist movement of the mid-19th century. He was seen as a champion of individualism and a prescient critic of the countervailing pressures of society, and he disseminated his thoughts through dozens of published essays and more than 1,500 public lectures across the United States. His most notable quote was, "Build a better mousetrap and the world will beat a path to your door." Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. Date of birth, February 27, 1807. Date of death, March 24, 1882. Longfellow was the most popular poet of his day during the 19th century and the first internationally acclaimed American poet. As a friend once wrote, no other poet was so fully recognized in his lifetime. Many of his works helped shape the American character and its legacy, particularly with the poem Paul Revere's Ride. He was such an admired figure in the United States during his life that his 70th birthday in 1877 took on the air of a national holiday with parades, speeches, and the reading of his poetry. The first Longfellow stamp was issued in Portland, Maine on February 16, 1940. Edgar Allan Poe. Date of birth January 19, 1809. Date of death October 7, 1849. Edgar Allan Poe, American short story writer, poet, critic, and editor who is famous for his cultivation of mystery and macabre. His The Raven numbers among the best-known poems in the national literature. He was awarded with the Hall of Fame for Great Americans. Edgar Allan Poe wrote to Longfellow, the one he looked up to, in May 1841 of his fervent admiration which genius has inspired in me, and later called him, unquestionably, the best poet in America. Walt Whitman. Date of birth May 31, 1819. Date of death March 26, 1892. Walt Whitman was a poet, essayist, and journalist who transformed poetry around the world with his disregard for traditional rhyme and meter and his celebration of democracy and sensual pleasure. His masterpiece, Leaves of Grass, a collection of poems, is widely studied by poets, students, and academics, set to music, translated into numerous languages, and is widely quoted. He is often referred to as the father of free verse. From universities to Hollywood, Whitman's legacy lives on in American culture. Emily Elizabeth Dickinson. Date of birth December 10, 1830. Date of death May 15, 1886. Dickinson is an American lyric poet who lived in seclusion and commanded a singular brilliance of style and integrity of vision. The final emergence of a truly indigenous English language poetry in the United States was the work of two poets, Whitman and Dickinson, who are widely considered to be the two leading 19th century American poets. She is said to represent the birth of one of the major American poetic idioms, the gnomic obscurity and irony. Robert Frost. Date of birth March 26, 1874. Date of death January 29, 1963. American poet Robert Frost depicted realistic New England life through language and situations familiar to the common man. He was a special guest at President John F. Kennedy's inauguration and became a poetic force and the unofficial poet laureate of the United States. No one has matched his Pulitzer Prize record. Frost took home the award in poetry a whopping 4 times. His honors were for New Hampshire, a poem with notes and grace notes, collected poems, a further range, and a witness tree. T.S. Eliot. Date of birth September 26, 1888. Date of death January 4, 1965. Thomas Stearns Eliot, an American English poet, playwright, literary critic, and editor, a leader of the modernist movement in poetry in such works as The Wasteland and 4 Quartets. His experiments in diction, style, and versification revitalized English poetry, and in a series of critical essays, he shattered old orthodoxies and erected new ones. The publication of 4 Quartets led to his recognition as the greatest living English poet and man of letters, and in 1948, he was awarded both the Order of Merit and the Nobel Prize for Literature. He was the founder of the Criterion. E. E. Cummings. Date of birth October 14, 1894. Date of death September 3, 1962. Edward Estlin Cummings, American poet, essayist, author, playwright, and painter who first attracted attention in an age of literary experimentation for his unconventional punctuation and phrasing. Cummings' name is often styled E. E. Cummings in the mistaken belief that the poet legally changed his name to lowercase letters only. Cummings used capital letters only irregularly in his verse as an American poet or painter. He wrote approximately 2,900 poems, 2 autobiographical novels, 4 plays, and several essays. William Faulkner. Date of birth September 25, 1897. Date of death July 6, 1962. William Cuthbert Faulkner, original surname Faulkner, is an American novelist, poet, and short story writer who was awarded the 1949 Nobel Prize for Literature. By the time of his death, Faulkner had already emerged not just as the major American novelist of his generation, but as one of the greatest writers of the 20th century. Unmatched for his extraordinary structural and stylistic resourcefulness, for the range and depth of his characterization and social notation, and for his persistence and success in exploring fundamental human issues in intensely localized terms. Ernest Hemingway. Date of birth July 21, 1899. Date of death July 2, 1961. Ernest Miller Hemingway, American novelist and short story writer, was awarded the Pulitzer Prize and Nobel Prize for Literature in 1954. He was noted both for the intense masculinity of his writing and for his adventurous and widely publicized life. His succinct and lucid prose style exerted a powerful influence on American and British fiction in the 20th century. Emerson's best-known work. The strong gods pine for my abode, and pine in vain the sacred seven. But thou, meek lover of the good, find me and turn thy back on heaven. Composed by Emerson, the poem is in the form of an utterance, a form which comprises sublime or metaphysical content while adding to it the balladic quatrain, music pattern which is used to represent the solemn nature of the subject. Throughout the poem, the Brahma appears as the only speaker who, according to Hindu philosophers of India, is omnipotent, omniscient, and omnipresent, sustaining the continuity of work. That the spirit is the only speaker signifies not only its absolute nature but also its sustaining power, upon which the existence of the entire universe, metaphorically, the poem is based. Longfellow's best-known work. Listen, my children, and you shall hear of the midnight ride of Paul Revere. On the 18th of April in 75, hardly a man is now alive who remembers that famous day and year. Paul Revere's Ride is a poem by American poet Henry Wadsworth Longfellow that commemorates the actions of American patriot Paul Revere on April 18, 1775. Although with significant inaccuracies, the poem is spoken by the landlord of the Wayside Inn and tells a partly fictionalized story of Paul Revere. In the poem, Revere tells a friend to prepare signal lanterns in the Old North Church to inform him if the British will attack by land or sea. He would await the signal across the river in Charlestown and be ready to spread the alarm throughout Middlesex County, Massachusetts, to warn the patriots while riding his horse. It was first published in the January 1861 issue of the Atlantic Monthly. Poe's best-known work. Be that word or sign of parting, bird or fiend, thy shrieks upstarting. Get thee back into the tempest and the night's Plutonian shore. Leave no black plume as a token of that lie thy soul hath spoken. Leave my loneliness unbroken, quit the bust above my door. Take thy break from out my heart, and take thy form from off my door. Quoth the raven, nevermore. In January 1845, The Raven appeared in the New York Evening Mirror and became an immediate popular sensation. It was soon reprinted, parodied, and illustrated, and made Poe a household name. The poem tells the story of an unnamed lover who, while lamenting the death of his beloved Lenore, is visited by a talking raven. The raven enhances his distress with its constant repetition of the word nevermore, slowly plunging him into madness. The poem makes use of a number of folk and mythological references and is noted for its stylized language and supernatural atmosphere. It influenced numerous later works, including the famous painting Nevermore by Paul Gauguin. The Raven is not only the most famous poem of Edgar Allan Poe, but also one of the most renowned in English literature. Whitman's best known work. I celebrate myself and sing myself, and what I assume you shall assume, for every atom belonging to me as good belongs to you. Published in 1855, most famous poem by Whitman, Song of Myself, is a mesmerizing mixture of romanticism and realism. This poem, which was initially titled Poem of the Walt Whitman, an American, also serves as a biography of Whitman. It caught the attention of public and critics alike when it was published and remains among the most acclaimed and influential poems written by an American. Dickinson's best known work, I Taste a Liquor Never Brewed, from tankards cooped in pearl. Not all the Frankfort berries yield such an alcohol. I Taste a Liquor Never Brewed is a lyrical poem written by Emily Dickinson, first published in the Springfield Daily Republican of May 4, 1861, from a now lost copy. The poem celebrates Dickinson's intoxication with life in an ironic and transformative manner, drawing on themes of popular temperance reform of the time. Although titled The May Wine by the Republican, Dickinson never titled the poem, so it's commonly referred to by its first line. Frost's best known work. I shall be telling this with a sigh. Somewhere ages and ages hence, two roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. Robert Frost was close friends with British poet Edward Thomas, and the two took many walks together. In Frost's words, Thomas was a person who whichever road he went would be sorry he didn't go the other. The road not taken was initially meant to be a gentle mocking of indecision, and Frost sent an advance copy of the poem to Thomas. In the poem, the speaker stands in the woods pondering which of the two roads ahead should he take. Though Frost probably wrote the poem to highlight the human tendency to look back and blame minor decisions in their life, it has since been interpreted by readers as a poem on the benefit of rethinking and not following the crowd. The Road Not Taken is not only the most famous poem of Robert Frost, but among the most renowned ever written. Eliot's best known work. April is the cruelest month, breeding lilacs out of the dead land, mixing memory and desire, stirring dull roots with spring rain. The style of the poem is marked by hundreds of allusions and quotations from undertexts of the Western canon, Buddhism, and the Hindu Upanishads. The poem shifts between voices of satire and prophecy, featuring abrupt and unannounced changes of speaker, location, and time. It is notable for its seemingly disjointed structure, indicative of the modernist style of James Joyce's Ulysses. The Wasteland is widely regarded as one of the most important poems of the 20th century and a central work of modernist poetry. I carry your heart with me, I carry it in my heart. I am never without it. Anywhere I go, you go, my dear, and whatever is done by only me is your doing, my darling. I fear no fate, for you are my fate, my sweet. I want no world, for beautiful you are my world, my true. And it's you are whatever a moon has always meant, and whatever a sun will always sing is you. E. E. Cummings is considered one of the best love poets of all time, and this poem is his most famous work in the genre. The poem can be compared with the sonnet due to its similar structure, but Cummings does add modern twists to it. It begins with the speaker describing the ubiquitous influence of his love in his life and goes on to touch several themes including oneness and love as the originator of life. Its popularity can be gauged from the fact that its opening line remains to be often tattooed by people, and its lines have been used in several works including the song Iron Square by English indie rock band Bloc Party. Faulkner's best known work. The theme of A Rose for Emily by William Faulkner is that people should let go of the past, moving on with the present so that they can prepare to welcome their future. Emily was the proof of a person who always lived on the shadow of the past. She clung into it and was afraid of changing. William Faulkner, as he gave his Nobel acceptance speech, had quoted a line from this. When Miss Emily Grayson died, we all went to her grave. For the rumors that surrounded her in life, only death could make us brave. The day turned black with a thunderous boom as down poured a heavy rain, washing up the maggots and the worms upon her stone-carved coffin mud-stained. Hemingway's best-known work. But man is not made for defeat, he said. A man can be destroyed, but not defeated. In 1953, The Old Man and the Sea was awarded the Pulitzer Prize for Fiction, and it was cited by the Nobel Committee as contributing to the awarding of the Nobel Prize in Literature to Hemingway in 1954. The Old Man and the Sea has been adapted for the screen 3 times. It is often taught in high schools as a part of the American literature curriculum.
And there you have it. So I hope you learned something about my members. Thank you so much. Until next time. Bye.